So let's get back to it. See, there we go. I've already got people that are trying to get in here. Okay, so getting back to it. The ileocecal valve, this is the ileum, last part of our small intestine. Cecum, which is just another word for the colon. That's the valve in between the two. That's it. You have your pyloric sphincter, which is what's at the, well, it's this side, the top of your stomach, keeping you from having things like gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. Okay, that should work. And then we're going to have our other natural sphincter, which is going to be, sorry, pyloric, and then esophageal. Oh my gosh. Okay. Now look at our daily secretion volumes. Oh, I know, Jake, you did wrestle. Did you ever do the whole spit in the cup to try to lose weight?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Most wrestlers did because it's an easier way to spit it.
God, I live in Kentucky. So think about it. 1,000 milliliters is 1 liter of water. How much does 1 liter of water weigh? About 2.2 pounds. It's an easy way to cut some weight. Now imagine your large intestine isn't doing this reabsorption. Take a look, guys. Between our gastric secretions, pancreatic secretions, bile, small intestine, and large intestine, we just, if you're spitting out the saliva, it's a different story. If you're swallowing it, obviously it's going into that. 6.7 liters of fluid, a gallon and a half of water you could lose per day if your colon's not doing its job. Now, this is why for like little kids, infants, toddlers, dehydration is a real risk if they do get diarrhea, because they don't have as much of reserves to pull from as we do comparatively as adults. So, questions so far here? Yes.
So how does somebody how does that count for your water loss?
Okay, just so we're clear, I was not laughing at the colostomy bag. You guys want to hear one of the most disgusting stories you're gonna hear in your entire life?
Go for it.
No, you sure about that? Like, this is fucking terrifying. And no, I'm hitting pause and record, but Corey, you are more than welcome to listen to this. That's one of the people, because now we're going to not share that story. When, this is actually the start point of your colon. Unfortunately, people do get colon cancer. So if it's all the way down in your sigmoid, right before we drop it off, we are going to have kind of a colostomy bag over here. We're going to actually do a pretty good job of resorbing a lot of the water. There's still, it is collecting the waste that naturally we're going to produce, but they're probably not going to have as much issue with dehydration. We should have other folks, and this is actually a thing that happened to a number of ex-bodybuilders and powerlifters from like the early thousands. Probably a bunch of Instagram idiots right now that are just, Tyrannosaurus Rex, just huge, that are going to have the same problem. When you do a lot of growth hormone, you not just hypertrophy your muscles, you also hypertrophy your GI. And in fact, there's some guys from West Side from the early thousands. This is not to speak poorly of the gentleman who passed away, but John Meadows is another one that used a lot of growth hormone. And because that had to have a significant amount of his large intestine resected, so removed. So he's going to have to, he had issues with fluid regulation because he's not getting that amount of fluid pull back from the colon like he naturally should. So they run the risk of dehydration much more than your average person. So does that answer your question? It is a good question. And it's, one of those things that can happen. Some of you guys, somebody in here has to know somebody that's had colon cancer. It's one of those things, unfortunately, that can happen to a lot of folks. Girl I went to high school with, she actually had it a year or two ago, and we're only in our mid to late, well, we're in our late 30s now, let's be honest. And that's pretty young for it to happen. But, unfortunately, when that occurs, you're right. Depending on how much we lose, we can have issues. So we're going to talk about later on is some folks have to have their jejunum resected. Some folks have to have their ileum resected. Some folks have to have their colon resected. How does that change their life? And I went through the basics. We're going to go even more so of what's being absorbed in each of those areas. If you don't have that, your GI is really good at trying to pick up the slack for what's missing. But it's not perfect. So you got to be a little bit more careful with people in those situations. And that's what we'll get into when we get you guys into the small groups later on. So we went through the basic overview. Now let's get a bit more granular. So Chewing. Please do it with your mouth closed. Okay? But we're doing is we're getting the food particles smaller, and when it's smaller, we now have a lot more surface area. So those enzymes have got more room, or sorry, more places to latch on to help break down that food stuff. So we're going to get it in faster. Okay? This definitely makes sure that it's in a fluid, or it's in a liquid state. Who here has eaten too many crackers, too many dry foods in a row, and you had that cotton mouth like it's literally hard to swallow? Okay? The body wants it to be in a very fluid state. We're effectively, sacks of water that walk around that aren't in water. So it's a big part of our digestive system. So when it comes to plants, remember guys, when it comes to corn, so we need to actually break the cell membranes of the food, or the cell walls, because we don't have a way to break it down enzymatically in the body. So not just corn, but I'm sure there's other vegetables you guys maybe didn't chew well enough, and then pass it aside. Oh, fun fact, how many guys have found the wonderful effect of eating too many beets at once? Okay, well, this is a story that's not bad. I really like beets as a vegetable. Other folks, I know, not your cup of tea, that's cool. Problem is, eat a lot of beets. The red dye in those beets passes through you. So 12 to 24 hours later, you look down, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying. Because if you see blood in your stool, that's a lower GI bleed. You need to go to the hospital. So if you look in the water, I mean, everyone inspects it before they flush it, right? Not the only one? Okay, so I'm weird, whatever. And you're like, oh dear God. And then you're like, wait, you had beets. Because literally then my wife, I was like, honey, was there red? Just like, yeah, remember you ate a lot of beets last night. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. She's a dietitian, so she's like, this is normal, don't freak out. But the other funny story about that is I had a friend that was his pre-workout that he thought he'd do for training one day was raw eggs and beets that he blended up. Oh no, it gets better. Did a really hard workout. Starts vomiting. What do you think that looks like? So like someone's like, your friend is dying. Like, he's not puking blood. He's just had a lot of beets today. Because I mean, it is just straight crimson. And plus with the egg is making it that much more viscous. So it really did look like he was puking blood. Anybody, if any of you want to lift weights with me sometime, just let me know. We have a lot of fun. Okay. So we've got our different salivary glands, parotid, sublingual, and the submandibular or mandibular glands. I'm sure you guys can tell that they're working. Don't worry so much about the location, but the fact that, remember, they're not just producing a little bit or releasing water, but they're also releasing enzymes for digestion. Yes, Nix? Okay, cool. So esophagus, we're using muscular contraction in a sequence essentially to push all that food down. Okay. Some folks can have issues with this where we can have a hard time with literally producing enough force to swallow. When folks get older, sometimes they actually need to have an appropriate thickness of what they're eating and even drinking to make it easier to swallow the food on down. Once again, straightforward, should be one way. Stomach, essentially, it's somewhere between 8 inches to a foot long. We've got our corpus, the body, and the antrum and the fundus. Okay, sorry, corpus or the body, which is the main part. We have the fundus further down and the antrum being at the very top. We've got that wonderful valve, which is trying to make sure that we're not releasing that food until it's broken down well enough inside of the stomach. Okay. Now it is also incredibly acidic, so we've also got to take care of that really, really quickly. So the big advantages of having a stomach is the fact that we can have large quantity of food there that we're going to be able to let it sit and then allow it to come into the small intestine for actual absorption at what a rate. Now, there is one macronutrient that you absorb in your stomach. Okay, all the other ones, we really got to wait until we're in the small intestine. But what's that one macronutrient we absorb in the stomach? Jake's going to be selling it in about 2.5 hours. Bingo. Alcohol is the one macronutrient that we can absorb through our stomach wall. And that's problematic because what happens if people absorb a lot of that on an empty stomach?
Dehydrated too fast and sick.
Yeah, it has that effect upon your body a lot faster. I'm sure you guys have all had friends that, oh gosh, I can't remember the exact term. It's effectively a form of disordered eating where your friends are like, I'm just not going to eat all day because I know I'm going to do so many calories tonight drinking. So they go into it on a relatively empty stomach. And then, Maddie, you've had a friend that's rode that struggle bus. And then what do you have to do with her hair? Yup,
Very long.
exactly. Okay. But does that make sense? Advantage of the stomach, different body sizes have obviously different amounts. If you guys want to get into eating competitions, you can stretch it out a little bit with time. Usually high fiber diets is the best way to do it because it's not as calorically dense. But what's really interesting about the research, people with naturally a thinner waist, specifically a lower amount of visceral adiposity, actually do better at eating competitions. Because think about it. Once Kobayashi came on and all the other hardcore eaters, do you see a real big person winning anymore? They literally, because of the visceral adiposity, they don't have the room to stretch. They get hung up on themselves. Yes.
How much does caffeine drinks actually dehydrate you?
Okay, good question. In reality, they don't really dehydrate you that much if you're habituated to it. Some folks, they're going to have a pretty good diuretic effect, but if you're doing caffeine all the time, your body gets used to it, so to speak. Alcohol obviously has a very potent diuretic effect. And it's not necessarily caffeine, it's the amount of caffeine. It's like, soda dehydrates you. Like, tell you what, if I'm dying of thirst and the only thing I have the option between is soda and nothing, I'm drinking the damn soda. Now, salt water will dehydrate you because it has hyperosmolarity. We're going to get to that more in the hydration chapter later on, but we can always talk about it a little bit right now. The key is the energy drinks. Energy drinks is borrowing energy from tomorrow because you didn't have enough today. Because typically, your sleep can get messed up, and Chris Perry can talk about that at much greater length with you guys. But the basic idea is you're using this because you didn't get enough sleep, because you didn't have a chance to take care of the stuff. Now, is that because you made poor choices? No, shit happens. Sometimes you have stuff happen, your sleep gets messed up, that's completely normal. But the caffeine, if you're used to it, tends to not have that same diuretic effect. Okay. Oh, thanks. Always have a question. So remember, we store the food in the stomach and we're going to release it when we're ready. Now, when we're going to release this pyloric sphincter, we're dropping some incredibly acidic food in there, meaning it's about a pH of 2. Okay. If you need to make a volcano, just throw up on some baking soda and that should make it bubble. Okay. That's not a good long-term strategy, but it is something that technically would work. So we only went a little bit through at a time because we're going to bring that pH up rapidly with bicarbonate, which is going to be coming from our pancreas. So look at all the negative feedback. Okay. What effectively doesn't cause the stomach to empty slower? What's the only thing that actually doesn't cause your stomach to empty slower?
Albert.
Say again?
Albert.
Technically, that is a type of carbohydrate, but that was a good shot.
Water.
And that's one that actually doesn't have the effect. The other is just the general overall stretch. Like if you just have that much food, it's going to empty faster. But if it had any calories whatsoever, it's going to slow it down, as well as if it happens to be much more salty or otherwise, it's going to empty slower. And then particle size, aka you didn't chew it well enough. Okay, and plus it's going to get broken down a little bit more in your stomach, which is really freaking cool. Okay, so notice when we got the fundus, we have the antrum, and we have the bottom. Okay, one of the coolest things that happens inside of your stomach is what's known as retropulsion. Your stomach, about through there, is actually going to cinch down. And by cinching down, the antrum is actually going to contract and pump the food back through your stomach. That's why you hear your stomach gurgling. That's that pumping action when it's pretty damn empty. So you can hear the bubbles and you can kind of feel that going through. But that actually causes the food to mix a bit better. So the pepsin, which is the enzyme we're going to talk about there that breaks down protein, as well as the hydrochloric acid, can work more on the food stuff to help you break it down. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So when our stomach is about empty, it's about 1.5 liters. We can go to 6 liters. There's some folks that can go way, way higher than that. Once again, those are usually competitive eaters. Good on you. we're going to relax the stomach to allow it to fill. We're going to producing, obviously, the digestive juices. So we're talking about pepsinogen, which can be activated by hydrochloric acid, as well as making sure they have the mucus around it, because the stomach is literally digesting itself all the time. So I just talked about that contract relax, which is going to turn the food into a type of essentially liquid that we refer to as chyme. Okay. So notice they say we don't really absorb anything other than water. I told you guys there is one macronutrient you take in. I just don't think that should be a macronutrient in your life, so to speak. If 10% or more of your calories come from alcohol, that's a cry for help. Yes.
When people get stomach surgeries, like shrink their stomachs, does that affect the way they digest their food?
So what we have here is we've lost that certain amount of flexibility that we had. We literally don't have the same amount of space to fill. And that's where the lap band can be effing terrifying, because they can eat so much that they pop it. And then they broke something inside. Or if it's the staples, they broke the staples, which are going through their stomach, and now they can quite possibly be bleeding. You know somebody that had it, or
No,
is that
that sounds terrible.
Yeah, hell no to that. Exactly. Guys, there's a lot of people fighting a lot of battles with trying to do different things with weight. The problem you have is just a sheer lack of volume. You don't really have so much an alteration of your ability to digest food. But herein lies the potential issue for folks that go through the gastric band. Some folks, if any of you guys can tell me the name, I don't think it was Alexander the Great. It could have been him, but it was another European general from very much so ancient era that effectively, I actually think it was Alexander the Great, where he literally burned the boats. So we have only one option. We either fight and win, or we die here, because we can't retreat anymore. So like, if you're going to go get the lap band or the stomach stapling, like, you burn the damn boats. Like, you now got to do stuff. You can reverse it, so to speak, but it's challenging. So we haven't gotten that far yet that we can really, well, we've talked about RDIs. Okay. Just make sure we're getting daily values. Now imagine if you can only eat 3 meals the size of my fist. Actually, probably smaller than that. I kind of got big hands. Okay. If you can barely fit an apple in there, if you do 3 apples a day, you're not definitely getting all the protein you need. You're not really getting much fat at all. You're getting, vitamin C and a couple other vitamins, but you're not getting all your minerals. So you just gotta be a lot more careful with making sure you're getting everything. And that's the same issue you're gonna have with any shortening of the GI. The key thing is the shortening of the GI, you have specific macronutrients you have issues with. This is where you have specific issues where you need to make sure that you're only you're getting in X, Y, Z. Like, that's when I'd say, yeah, you should probably take a multivitamin just to cover them bases. Good question. Does that answer, Jaylee? Okay. So, man, I like it. So much better teaching in person as opposed to just staring at a wall. Now, parasympathetic tone is what's going to allow our GI tract to get moving. When are we in parasympathetic tone, guys? Zoom tight. When are we in parasympathetic tone?
At rest.
Yeah, rest. And remember, guys, it's not so much a all or none, it's a toggle. So it's like, where are we at? When you're really relaxed right now, your body's going to be digested. As we go up higher and higher in exercise intensity, eventually we hit a point where we're going to shut down digestion. And how does that feel? Specifically, if you have a decent sized meal in there. I know that's had to happen to you at least a couple times practicing there. How's that feel, Gabby?
No.
What do we refer to that as? Stomach cramps?
Yeah.
Yeah? You just, it's never happened to me, bro. I don't even know what you're talking about. I ate an entire pizza then jump in the pool for F it. Okay? So, some folks are going to have different amounts of issues with this, but keep in mind, our autonomic nervous system is also linked to our digestive tract. This is why what also can happen to folks when they get really scared. Good. We're talking about the other end. Good. But how many guys feel nauseous when you're really scared and or have vomited? And this is going to be anxiety. Does it make sense? That's going to be that type of sympathetic tone. Okay. So we have a number of different hormones that are going to be produced by our digestive tract that are going to work to tell our body to digest the food and then tell ourselves when we're full and otherwise. Okay. Questions? Make sense? Yes.
Is that not, well, I know a lot of my teammates and stuff like before conditioning, they have trouble, like they have diarrhea right before because they're so anxious about it. So I'm assuming that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's completely normal when scared, guys, to shit yourself. or to feel like you're going to. That's fine. Actually, it's more due to the epinephrine and the basic idea of if all of a sudden like a mountain lion came in the room and I'm wearing the wrong shoes to run for my life, like what, and we talked about this in X-Phys, what's going to happen if you shit yourself? What have we done?
Losing weight, getting faster.
We're now a little bit lighter, so we'll be able to run a little bit faster. Depending on how much you guys had, that could be like a 2-3 pound swing. Okay, so we're interesting animals in that we've still got that rigging from when we actually literally had to fight an animal to survive, or a really shitty version of our own species. Unfortunately, that same rigging shows up in what? Now, this is where if I was a dickhead, I'd pick on one of you guys that never talks and make you stand in the front of class and teach right now. Obviously, Jake would not be that shaken by it, but I'm sure some of you guys, if I told you had to give this presentation right now and do the rest of the lecture, like you would much rather like, yeah, you'd be like, no, like that's, you know, some people's nightmare is public speaking. You know, it's like you guys, no, I'd much rather like, I don't know, whatever. You'd rather fight me physically than you would rather try to give this lecture. Like fighting me sounds less intimidating because either you're gonna knock me out fast enough that it won't be a problem, or I'm gonna knock you out fast enough that you won't remember. But why are we hitting each other? That's not how this goes. But getting back to what you're bringing up, that is why some folks are gonna have issues with bowel movements before hard exercise, or feeling like, man, I gotta pee already. But this also shows up in things like test anxiety, public speaking anxiety, different things along those lines, because it's that same, like, your brain just knows I'm afraid. And when I'm afraid, I turn on that sympathetic nervous system. And that's not always a good thing. I mean, is that useful when you're trying to pitch a baseball? No, I mean, if you're trying to spike the ball on the ground or throw it over, but you need to have that certain amount of calm and control. But how many of your teammates, they're great, but the second, you know, let's say you guys have a phenomenal season and you go to the College World Series. If you, not that we're going to name names, okay? But who do you think are potentially going to run out onto the field with the brown pants on, if you catch my drift, when they're under that much stress? Because they haven't been used to that much stress. Okay. So yeah, I got a fun stress story from last night. I'll tell you guys if we're really bored when we do a break. So second we get that food in, we start the clock. It's going to take about 4 to 6 hours for that meal to be completely resolved. Okay. So for those of you guys that ate before you came, some of us that look like we're looking forward to eating at some point, we're going to go ahead and break things down as we go through to take it in. If we're not able to take it in, it's going to get fermented inside of us. This is the whole thing about, you know, beans, the magical fruit. Okay. Human bodies can break down what's known as alpha 1,4 linkages between carbohydrates. Okay. All that, okay. How many carbons does glucose have? You guys remember that one? How many carbons does it have? 6. Okay. Alpha 1,4 linkage simply means a linkage from the 1 to the 4th carbon. Make sense? In the alpha configuration. Now, what we can't break down is the beta 1,4 configuration. Beta 1,4 configurations is literally what makes up plant cell walls. And so bacteria can. That's how they ferment that, and we don't. Does that make sense to you guys? So we are going to be passing this stuff through our intestines. Now, when we talk about hormones, guys, here's all the ones that are important when it comes to the GI. You remember us talking about any of these in X-Phys? No, because we talked about enough in X-Phys anyways. We don't need to be trying to get even more confused. First one is straight up the gastrin. Gastrin is essentially stomach's own hype man. Tells the stomach to do your job better. Like, it is essentially the easy A, or no, the flavor flav. Okay? You know that analogy works. Okay? Bring some energy, but I mean, like easy E. It's like, okay, like it's not the front man, but it brings some fire. Okay? Now, what we then have is secrete, and this is going to be released in our small intestine, so we get more bicarbonate in our pancreatic juice. We release that bicarbonate because now when it comes to cooking, what is bicarbonate? Sodium bicarbonate specifically. It's baking soda, okay? We produce that bicarbonate to cancel out the effects of how low that pH is coming from our stomach. Who wants to go ahead and try to produce or pronounce this one? Yeah. Cholecystokinin. I have a PhD, guys. It's okay. That's why we're going to go with CCK. Cool. But this is telling us to produce more of the enzymes and notice slow down digestion. So we're going to be able to really break down the foods we're taking in. Okay. GIP, go figure. It's inhibitory. Okay. Same thing with the glucagon-like peptide, slowing us down. And finally, guanylin. That's so we can retain that water and sodium at the end. Okay. Because we're running a lot of fluid through our GI every day. And if it's not working right, I'm sure one of you guys had a stomach flu sometime recently. Anyone had a stomach flu recently enough that you can remember it pretty well? But could you guys ballpark how much weight you lost? That's probably a better choice to do. That's no offense, you're not a large human to start.
No.
Okay. My sister's bad joke is I'm just one more stomach flu away from my goal weight. Okay. That's the last time I was under 200 pounds. It was actually because of the stomach flu. I lost a little over 10 pounds in 2 days. And it was, oh God. Okay. So that's another fun. You guys want another fun vomiting story?
Always.
Okay. So you guys know how I like to lift heavy, and I'm very smart. So I had a really heavy deadlift day, did a lot of hamstring oriented work. And whenever I'm going to vomit, it feels like my jaw is trying to migrate to my throat. That's how I know I'm going to vomit. It's just like keeps backing up for some reason. And before I went to bed, I made a protein shake that was made up of mostly just spirulina. Spirulina is a very, very green protein powder. It comes from algae. Vegans will tell you about how it's the best thing in the world. But I'll tell you what, when you're puking it up, it is straight up forest green. But the key thing wasn't the vomiting into my own toilet. The problem is when I was there, then my first hamstring spasmed. So then I nearly headbutt the toilet going forward as my hamstring spasm. So then I'm in this weird full stretch while I'm trying to vomit. And then the other hamstring spasms and I fall back and nearly start hitting the floor with it. And then I'm literally like legs out wide, standing bolt upright, face forward. And my wife walks in and is just like, you're an idiot. So once again, it's sometimes a two-way street. When it comes to our small intestine, that stands for meter. Okay, guys, 2 to 3 meters in length. So if we convert that over to freedom units, we're talking about somewhere in the tune of a little over 6 feet, getting close to 10 feet in some cases. Now, when we think about these variabilities in sizes, how do you think this variability works?
Is it based on your size? Like,
Bingo. So do you think your GI is the same size and length as somebody like Landon up here?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm small.
Exactly. Does that make sense? That's where we have this variability. Okay. Now it's not very big in diameter. It's 3 to 5 centimeters, which means a little over an inch to about 2 inches diameter. It's not big around. But what we're going to find is we're getting nearly all of this absorption to take place. And that's a mistake on the slide. It's not duodenum, it should be the ileum and jejunum. Okay. What we find is we have a huge amount of folds inside of these. Okay. These folds allow for a massive increase in surface area. This increase in surface area is allowing us to have the effect that if we really were to go ahead and just like flatten out your GI, so it was just the cell barriers, it would be, I think it's definitely greater than a tennis court for most people's GI, is your actually absorbable space. Okay. And then we also have microvilli on the cells themselves. Questions here? No? Okay. Now, with our enzymes, if it says amylase, that is related to carbohydrates. Okay, we then have our specific ones that are noticed on the brush border, meaning they're literally on the cells that are going to break down our disaccharides. Okay, which one of those is of interest to probably a lot of people in here because your body does a shit job of producing them?
I spaced out a minute. Can you repeat it? I'll be honest.
That's okay, it's okay. Of the carbohydrate enzymes that are on the brush border, which of these are, which of one of those is probably, at least a few of you guys are lacking in one of them? Lactase. What's lactase useful for? Good. What does lactose come from? Dairy products. You're right. Milk, ice cream, a lot of different options. And if we don't have the lactase, we say that we're what, intolerant? Makes sense. When you're born, you naturally have a lot of that enzyme because you're, in theory, you're using your mother's breast milk. It's one of those things that a number of human beings grow out of. Yes, Abby.
Is it actually because like, like some people are lactose intolerant, or like dairy, or like.
Yeah, they'll take the enzymes that allow them to. You're cheating the system. You're utilizing something to enhance your absorption, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The key is, why are you doing it? If you're doing it because you like to eat ice cream, yogurt, some other type of dairy product on occasion, yeah, go for it. But if it's like, no, I want to get underneath a cow in a field and get it straight from the source, that's weird. Don't do that. That's really weird. But we're humans. We're really weird. Because notice what I just said. How many of you guys are like revolted at the idea? If you were driving through anywhere and you saw a dude underneath a cow, you'd be like, what? You probably call, like, I don't know if that's legal, but it shouldn't be.
Someone had to do it first. Someone had to figure it out first.
And then someone's like, we should milk it first. So we feel like we're a little bit further from it, right? I mean, that's weird, but that's okay. And then how many of you guys love cheese? Yeah, so I mean, like, okay, we're another step adjacent from getting weird. It's okay. Some folks really like the enslaving of the entire females of a certain species and murdering their young males for their own food enjoyment. That's cool. Enjoy your cheese, guys. Don't think about where it comes from. Now you're thinking about where it comes from. Okay. Now, our lipid. Notice the lingual. It's going to start going on in the mouth. And then we have that pancreatic lipase. That's where we're going to really break this down into individual fatty acids. Okay. Now, proteins, notice, guys, this is another long list. We got our first one, which is the active form is called pepsin in our stomach. And notice, this is the only one up here that's actually designed to work in a really low pH environment because the stomach is really acidic. But then everything else, notice all coming from the pancreas, is going to be helping us break down protein from different sizes. Now, why do we need to have effectively 4 different types of enzymes to break down proteins when we only need 2 for fats? But we've got 5 for carbohydrates. Your body's not going to produce an enzyme it doesn't need. I think I've told you guys before in this class, but I'm not quite sure, that we have in our own genetic code the ability to produce vitamin C. We just don't have the ability to turn that gene on anymore because humans eat enough things with vitamin C. We just said, F it. We'll get it from something else. We don't need to make it on our own. Okay. So why do you think there's so few, yet so many in the different macronutrient classes? It's harder to absorb. We need to break. Think of it this way. Well, when you say it's harder to absorb, why would you say that? Are you sure? No, it's okay. It's okay, guys. My goal is not to destroy people's confidence in themselves. That's for my graduate students. Okay. Yes.
Is it possibly because there may be like those 4 specific enzymes in specific types of proteins, so those are the only ones that can actually like break it down and everything, so I don't know how to, I was trying to think of the word to explain it out, my brain just didn't cooperate with me.
You know what? I appreciate anyone that talks with their hands. I do it all the same time too. You're right in that, guys. Think about how simple it is. All these are doing, notice, I love this. It's got another mistake on it. It says maltose. It should also say fatty acids. All we're doing is taking a triglyceride and then snipping off 2 of the fatty acids. That's it. We don't have to do anything else. When you absorb a protein, so like I had a little, Rose, I had a little bit of, sounds like a bodybuilding meal. I had broccoli, some rice, and a little bit of ground beef for dinner. Woo. Now, when I say ground beef, what was the beef before it was ground? What did it come from? Good. What part of the cow?
Good word.
The good part. Well, I mean, Gracie likes the cow testicles. So remember she was telling us about, I'm waiting for her to bring them. I mean, I will try them if they show up here. And then I'll probably vomit. But I am not afraid to try stupid things. Oh yeah, if you guys bring raw eggs, I'll drink those anytime. But I am going to crack them first and make sure you're not trying to poison you on the phone. But getting back to it, it came from the muscles, right? So now think back to X-Fits. Cow muscle and human muscle is pretty damn similar. So what's going to be inside of those muscles? Think about different proteins inside of muscle. What allows muscles to contract, guys? What are the major proteins there? Tropomyosin, yes. That's a great one for inhibiting contraction. What's one that actually does the contraction, the gravity pull?
It's not the
Actin-myosin. Myosin is a really big, really complex protein. They have a huge number of amino acids. So all these enzymes are scissors. Any of you guys into crafting? How many different types of scissors do you need for crafting? Especially if you're trying to do some fun stuff with borders and edges. Say it again. That's a lot. And if somebody dares to use your crafting scissors on just random stuff in the house, how do you feel? Oh, wow. I think we found some trouble at home. And that's okay. So it's the equivalent of you need specialized scissors for each of these. So think about it, like maltase is made up of 2 glucose together. Sucrose, so it has sucrase, that's a glucose and fructose, and then lactase or lactose broken down by lactase, that's 1 glucose and 1 lactose. Each of those is a different type of carbohydrate, so that's why you need a different type of scissors to get into each of them. Does that make sense to you guys? So when we're looking at these enzymes, that's why we have so many of them, because proteins can come in a wild number of configurations. So we need different scissors to break them down in different ways. Now, gallbladder is there for that bile secretion. Bile is really good with helping get fat and emulsifying it into much smaller micelles for absorption. Okay, we're going to produce more of it whenever we happen to have a meal that had a lot of fat. And we're going to absorb a lot of it when it comes back through. There's some cholesterol in there as well. That's part of the reason why they say a high fiber diet can help with cholesterol levels, because it actually is going to stop the total return that you were having previously. Now, pancreas, aside from being really important for glucose regulation in the body, notice, guys, we're going to be getting that pH back up through here, as well as this is the major component of producing a lot of enzymes for digestion for our protein, carbs, and fats. Now, once we move through here, we've got our large intestine, okay? This is going to be somewhere around 5 odd feet long, give or take, depending on the size of the person, okay? We've got the colon, and you can read the rest, okay? We go ascending, transverse, descending, and then sigmoid. We're getting a little bit of absorption in the first part, and it's really going to be storage the further on we go. Water resorption, sodium resorption, as well as we're going to get 1 or 2 vitamins, okay? And then obviously we drop it off the backside at some point. Questions about anything we've covered so far? Nope. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to hop into our first little, shall we say, yeah, group activity for the evening, okay? let's get you to make some new friends. So I want you guys to go ahead and divide up in that I want you guys to line up in the center of class in order of your birthday, not the year, the day, okay? So if you're born January 1, you're all the way up here. If you were born December 31st, all the way back there. And it's going to line yourself up based on birthday. Make sense?
I'm January 3rd. Okay. January 12th. Okay, my birthday's in February. Really? Well, y'all can just stand up. Yeah, he said.
You got it.
I think we're kind of close.
You guys can talk, like we can, I'm not making you guys do this with like charades. We can make friends. What is it? Yeah, that's pretty quick. Wow, that's a pretty big gap.
Yes.
February 28th.
Oh, shit. It's gonna be my day here, neighborhood.
Okay, so I want the four of you ladies together. You guys are gonna do large intestine resection. So if somebody loses their large intestine, how is that gonna change their life? What's gonna happen? How's the body adapt or not adapt if that happens? Make sense? So, birthday?
April 13th.
Wow, don't think about what your parents were all doing 9 months before that. Okay, so, I want you guys to be, if they had to have their ileum resected. So how's their digestion gonna change? What's gonna have to change up and down? And what might they have a hard time absorbing? So you guys can kind of move around so you're gonna be closer to each other. So you guys go and talk. So, birthday?
Where y'all at?
Okay, so the next one, you guys, I want you guys to go with. Okay, so June was resected. What is your issue? She said you gotta get some- what do you maybe have some issue? Returning. Cam, how about with the ladies in the front? It'll make sense. All right, so.
Yeah. Section of.
They also say sphincter of Odie, like just pancreatic duct, and otherwise the fall really good. If that got resected, damage otherwise, tell them to change the digestion. I'll just try to approach that. Okay.
I don't salt.
I'm gonna have you guys, you're gonna talk a little bit about both IBS and Crohn's. And I'm pretty sure I just spoke Crohn's. But effectively, those are GI disorders that affect different locations of the GI. What the hell is it? What the causes?
Oh, yeah, so we're doing the, basically, we're gonna see if you lose your ileum, what happens to your digestion? What can't you do anymore? What do you need, that kind of stuff.
$6:53, guys. Plan on being ready to talk through your side of it at 7. Okay, you guys got some time.
Yeah, well, more diarrhea because you.
For long enough for partial digestion.
It looks like if you have any long-term chronic conditions like this, then I guess Oh, wait, sorry. If you have an ongoing, like, long-term cancer, or disease, then you may need to onboard.
You have to leave 2016.
All right, how you guys doing? Good. So obviously, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but you guys can go a little bit more in detail when it comes to, it's not just made of fluid retention, it's little other factors that can be an issue as well. So we guys come up with.
It's more than a meter information. The only I can't.
So.
But if less than, it says cover.
It's not. But when you say candidate, so this can be think about your part. So.
So it looks like if a large part of your small intestine, it says that you have probably just like, you just have, and then it looks like you actually develop like a long-term chronic conditions like cancer, Crohn's disease, so you may need like something.
And you think about also what macronutrients, healing, does a better job of taking in. That's it.
Well, if it's 95% and it's genetic, is that split evenly between the two, or is like on top of it?
A lot of this pretty much where we get all the. Order goes in, that's gonna be where we're getting a lot of records. So
It also results in kidney stone,
What
osteoporosis.
Does that make sense? So you can get around different things, but you're gonna have bigger struggles depending on what part you guys. That's a little like fine tuning. That's okay, that's a good start. Is that, you okay, buddy? Long day? It's okay. Everyone said another 100K. Well, it's a real.
It says you should eat 6 to 8 small meals rather than like 3 big meals. So it's easier for
So
digestion.
what, if you hear blank.
You have to be extra cautious about when chewing food, make sure it's broken down as much as possible. Only drink half a cup or 4 ounces of liquid.
So everyone else has their focus points for the body, but the GI, we're just on that. You guys have, it goes
And then it
down
has a lot of like
in different
substitutes
ways.
for like proteins, which you have easier broken down like
So
fish,
yours is probably.
eggs, tofu, peanut butter.
Yeah, because the B12 is only in.
Yeah. And then it says, a low fiber complex carbohydrates usually don't easily broken down.
You guys, you know, let's, you're right.
Moderate your fats,
You're right.
low sugar.
Key is, okay, so this is not what it is, the hard time. Breaking down.
And then also high limit oxalate foods, tea, coffee.
He was confident though.
That's one.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the.
Fibers harder to digest.
Everyone feels better. It's like,
Well, now you're just gonna rattle off numbers until I say you're right, so I'm gonna make you go a little bit further than that, okay? What you guys got?
We need vitamins A, D, and C, B12, calcium, potassium, and zinc. Yeah, about everything.
Oh, no, there's a lot more than that, but that's good. You guys are getting granular. Okay, guys, it's 7 bells. You guys still need a few minutes, so we're ready to give it a shot.
Zinc, yeah.
That's okay. Take a few more minutes. If you guys need to use a bathroom break or otherwise, this is to go and do it after this. I plan on trying to go through the rest of the slides and get you guys on your merry way.
Other than that, so.
I'm gonna grab some water. What are you guys going? You guys need to? That's good.
You might have need oral rehydration solution recipes. Oral rehydration solution recipes. So I guess it said you will be creating as much bile in your saliva will be lower, so I'm glad you wrote most of that down. I wrote down 3 things and all that. I'm just gonna start reading.
Yeah, he's like.
I'll work every Thursday.
I went to work at 4:30.
God, I didn't get off work at 2 a.m. last night.
So kind of the same deal.
Dude, so last night this guy fell asleep on the bar. I went to like try to help him out, you know, he was literally like not talking. Just wanted to help him out. So I picked watermelon
And that was like.
and Belgian. And then I was like, all right, buddy, like, come on. Literally hugged the bar, so I picked him up. So he was like, okay, I'm dead weight. So he grabbed me by the shirt and dragged him outside. Set him up against the wall. He like got to sleep inside the wall. So we wake him up. He goes to his car, gets in the driver's seat. So like, you gotta get out of the car. He gets out, cops show up the patties to arrest him. And then he just sprints across the street and gets in his car in front of the cops and peels off. And I was like, no, he was fucked up.
Yeah.
I was like, messed up when I was like 12. I was like, oh, I'm out.
Cody was carrying a bar, carrying a dude out of the bar one time with Phil with him as he was walking out the door.
Dude, on New Year's, me and Cody threw somewhere like I mean, he threw a man. Like it was a good 5-6 feet in air. And I was like, oh, nice, Cody. I was like, that was meant to you. He got engaged.
What?
He got engaged.
You see him lately? Bro, he had shoulder surgery. He doesn't even look like the same person.
What did
Like, bro,
he do? He tear one of those, tears up.
Like, bro.
Yep, thank you.
He like said had that separate AC joint separation.
No, could be your rotator cuff too.
I think it was rotator cuff. I don't think it was ever good.
Which he probably did that just because he's like so stretched out.
Did that for like
And then it's him holding 80-pound dumbbells when I was talking.
Dude, he's probably been injured for a long time, to be honest with you. He's probably been injured.
Oh, he had me.
Yeah, probably. When you got that much muscle, maybe that's hard to tell.
Well, your body doesn't have to support it as much as your muscles are doing work.
Unless you just like tear it straight off the
And
bone.
hell, oh, yeah. But I've got one of my friends, yeah, after wrestling, he had those things going on his own. He had no clue.
I still. But yeah, dude, I bet he weighs 108 pounds.
100. Oh, so he lost like 56
Dude,
pounds.
Besides the legs, there's not much difference between me and him.
I think he's.
Oh, I'm sure, I'm sure.
Well, because that's what his job was, like,
He's selling cars now.
Yeah, I had 200.
We're gonna car lot.
probably waiting to get back to doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah, he's getting back into it now, man. He's doing some PC and stuff, so he's back to the pretty soon.
They'll just start hitting like 1,000 reps if you can't take weight.
We're
Oh, yeah. Which some of those can have repaired tendons, so I understand.
I don't know. I'd like to ride it at least once before this last year.
Before this class started.
No, not before this class, though. Before this life. Shit, I'm not around it once before this class.
I don't know, if I'm ever gonna do that, I wanna wait until I'm like 45, 50, middle-aged weight, and then I come back. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I wasn't gonna do it until I was like in my 30s.
And to the point where like it was the only way you were gonna get it. I get it.
All right, folks, you guys feel ready now? We good enough? Okay, so we're gonna go around, talk through, obviously, your section, what is gonna be going on if unfortunately we lose it, because sometimes folks go through traumatic injuries or otherwise, and they have to have significant amounts of their GI resected. It is not fun, but it beats the whole dying thing. So I guess technically last in the order, but first up here, large intestine. So what happens?
A large intestine is actually also
Mhm.
and it's associated with a larger risk of dehydration and hypothermia due to the fact that the water absorption is coupled with sodium and potassium absorption, as well as B1, B2, B6, and B12 being the largest in biotin. It also causes a greater frequency of application and a different stool consistency and also the absorption of water.
Awesome. Yeah, unfortunately, welcome to diarrhea. Population you every day for the rest of your life. All right, folks, still kind of going backwards. Ilium. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Its main function is to absorb the nutrients in the already digested food,
Mhm.
especially vitamin B12, A, C, zinc, and then also fat in producing bile. So if you remove it, then you're not going to be able to absorb those nutrients. So a lot of people will become anemic or have osteoporosis and diarrhea.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the second you remove any of the stuff, that's going to be a side effect for a lot of folks. But notice that's the key thing. When we're looking at the difference between the jejunum and the ileum is we have differing absorptions of different nutrients. So both are going to suffer. The key is what's the one that they're going to be potentially lacking more in. So feeding on forward, we're still now technically going backwards in the GI. June.
Okay, so if you were to have the jejunum removed, then the last part of the ileum can adapt and absorb more nutrients. However, if there's more than about 3 feet, so 1 meter of the ileum is removed, the remaining small intestine usually cannot adapt. And then we found out that the main macronutrients that could be consumed in the jejunum would be the carbohydrates and fats. However, if the jejunum were to be removed, then the ileum would have to continue to absorb what is left of the carbohydrates and proteins. And then also it causes a reduction in insulin.
Rock and roll. Makes sense, guys? So we've had more of a fat problem here. We have more of a carb problem, depending on where we're pulling from. So it's still major losses, but not the same. Now, duodenum loss is pretty damn rare, and if it happens, you're probably gonna honestly die from it. But if you don't, what's going on?
So that's it's the first part of digestion, so it can break down into proteins. So it's gonna be really acidic going through the rest of your body, so diarrhea basically. And
Funny how that keeps happening.
also, produces the CCK, which is, and I think that's all the hormones, but
Mhm.
and produces the hormones, and then it receives secretions from the liver and the pancreas. So you just have a lot of problems absorbing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, like the duodenum gets jacked up, This is when you, sometimes people can have blockages at the sphincter of Oddi, and that's where everything dumps in. And that's super bad. I'm sure you guys have heard of folks that have had pancreatitis, or they had well, they had some type of gallstones or otherwise, that their gallbladder wasn't producing bile or wasn't releasing bile like it should, and they're having major issues with digestion as well. So it's pretty bad. And now we get the things that happen more realistically to folks you're gonna encounter. Yes, Nick?
Like we couldn't find anything about it, but like, say for like a super low pH and the bile and stuff's not mixing at the time, does that, like affect the absorption of nutrients? Cause does it like destroy like enzymes and stuff since the pancreas are like?
Yes, because enzymes are supposed to work within certain pH ranges, so that can absolutely denature them. The other issue you're gonna have is effectively, you're constantly doing more damage to your GI. Like, the funny thing is, if you guys actually, our nervous system doesn't tell us how bad digestion hurts, because if we could actually feel how bad digestion hurts every day, you'd never fucking eat. Because you'd be in pain all the time, because you're constantly dumping battery acid effectively into, and then you're buffering out really quick. But everyone here has had a stomach ache, unset stomach or otherwise. That's just that's the bit that's getting through. That's obviously super bad, because that's why you're usually double over diarrhea, everything else that can come with it. So you're going to eat through those tissues faster, which means those tissues need to remodel faster, which means you're going to exhaust them faster, because everything is a copy of a copy of a copy in your body. And that's why I look like shit compared to you guys, because I'm a lot older. So all my cells have had to go run on the copier a lot more times than your guys have. So self-burn on me, right? But imagine doing the same thing on your GI. And the line I give to one of the classes I'm teaching is, you only live as long as your first organ failure. So whatever organ you're running through faster, once it's gone, that tends to be it. Kidneys, you can go on dialysis. Yes, you can get transplants for a lot of those things, but you know how many folks you guys know, because they drank a lot and did other not great choices, they just burned through their liver. And they got to get that thing replaced, or that's it. And so hence, yes, it's gonna be really hard on your GI. And you can't really replace the GI, though. You can go total peripheral nutrition, which is literally for the rest of your life, all of your nutrition through an IV. Not a party. And the person that I know survived of it, lived that way, real skinny guy. Yes.
That might be a bad question, but what level should your pH be at in the body? That might be.
Well, it depends on where you're at. So stomach is really acidic. Your blood is going to be potentially a little bit basic. Your exercising muscles are going to obviously get to be a little bit more, a little bit acidic, not very. So it depends on the tissue. Your body is really good at regulating your pH. I know there's some folks like, oh, you got to eat the alkaline diet. It's going to clean you up. Like, nah, dog. This thing does a pretty good job of taking whatever dumpster foods I put into it and then maintaining these things naturally. So pH is variable based upon tissues. Your body's, once again, very good at controlling those pHs on their own. So that's just a way that people can try to sell products to folks. It might not necessarily be very useful. Yeah. You know, like what Goop is for middle-aged white women is what Joe Rogan is for bros. Just selling people shit they don't need. No, I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to take that statement back. I'm not. But let's go ahead and talk to us a little bit about what is IBS when it's Crohn's, because we just did specific issues. These are more complicated because they can flare up in different components of the GI. So kind of talk through how this happens and really where we're at as far as knowledge in this area.
So for Crohn's, we found out there's a lot that's unknown. Very unknown as to why or who gets it. It's an autoimmune disorder, and they pretty much have to avoid all kinds of foods, like whole grains, beans, high fiber, nuts, caffeine, caffeine.
Well, there's technically different types of caffeine. There really is. You're not wrong. But like, we don't need to get that granular for this class.
Bacteria in the intestines is a reason for it. You can't drink alcohol or eat butter or mayonnaise. It could be hereditary, it could not be. It's also unknown. But some of the symptoms are like fever, fatigue, blood in the stool, mouth sores, appetite loss, diarrhea. And then for IBS, we found that it affects the large intestine. Some of the signs and symptoms are like fainting, abdominal pain, bloating, gas. It can cause severe diarrhea caused by bacteria or virus. There's typically a surplus of bacteria in the intestine, and it can be caused by like early life stress, especially those like
earlier in your life, so if you experience a lot of stressful events,
Mhm.
really young, you're more at risk for it.
Mhm.
And then you're also at a higher risk if you are female. And then it disrupts the movement of food through the intestines. So if it slows it down, then you're gonna be constipated. If it speeds it up, you're gonna have the diarrhea.
Mhm.
And you also have extra sensitive nerves.
Remember I talked about digestion hurts? They get to actually feel it. So it's not fun. Now, obviously, if you're talking about bowel bleeding, now we're talking about ulcers and otherwise, and those are not fun. And you guys that have got family members that get stomach ulcers and otherwise, but H. pylori and then also stress-induced ulcers. Yes,
So with people with
diverticulitis.
yes, can they feel like if something gets stuck in like the passage, like something like going down to the intestine?
Oh, God. Yeah, now you're talking about fistulas and those are not fun. But yeah, you can have effectively invaginations of the GI where things get stuck in the pockets, get effectively even more fermented and what's really read more infected because it'll get an bacterial overgrowth and it's supposed to be super painful and not fun, obviously for somebody going through that. I'm sure everyone in here has met somebody or knows somebody who has, Crohn's, a food allergy, IBS. IBS is just a giant bucket. Your irritable bowel syndrome, like, what does that mean? Like, your bowels are just irritable. They just get up one day, like, don't talk to me, man. I haven't had my coffee yet. But it is important to link that there is triggers. Now, obviously, this is where it can be a little, I'll use the term funky, because how many folks have you met where, it's what is the new in vogue food intolerance to have or thing to not eat? It's like, oh, I don't eat dairy because, it's just unclean. Now, if you don't eat dairy because you have a lactose intolerance, that checks, do that. Makes you pass fast, makes you pass gas and frightens all your friends, or scares all your friends away. You don't want to be the person who's eating lactose and doesn't do it. How many of you guys know somebody who's a celiac? Body can't handle gluten, they have issues. I'm sure you guys know somebody that's allergic to some random food thing. They can't do, some type of fruit or vegetable, nuts, that's easily an allergen for a lot of folks. And that's like where your body is like, I don't know what that is, but F that. And then they react way too hard. And you're talking about allergic reactions when it comes to GI. Yeah. Peanuts, like you can kill some people with freaking peanuts. How insane is that? You just throw it at them. Yeah, not even hard.
So, like, I don't really get to it, but like, is there anything that for Crohn's and IBS that they can do, like, to make it less severe, like, as far as like medicine and stuff now?
It's still, it's one of those things that's areas to developing. And the problem is it's probably going to end up being with IBS. If I had to put money on it, okay, there's going to be a mechanism or a couple mechanisms of like, this is the ways that I have, but we're probably using Crohn's and IBS as a bucket term. And it's going to be, it's like IBS due to blank, IBS due to blank, IBS due to blank, IBS due to blank. And when we can parse into that one, it's like if someone says they have cancer, well, I mean, that's scary, obviously, depending on where you're at. But if it's like, yeah, if you say skin cancer, it's like, well, you might have a gnarly scar, but if you catch it early enough, you're going to be fine. If somebody tells you have brain cancer, it's like, oh shit, dog, that's rough. You say you have, not to be cavalier about this because it's not fun, but if they say you have testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, it's like, well, looks like you're going to be down to one, if you know what I mean. You don't got the backup plan down there anymore, but you can get around certain things. So I think it's going to be one of those, it's more elucidated. There seems to be some things that involve maybe zinc and selenium intake. You guys did bring up the stress and otherwise. And what I do find very fascinating, and this is me just being my, okay, this is going to be potentially a polarizing statement, but I want us to think it through. Do you think it is naturally actually more stressful to grow up female in the US than it is to grow up male?
Next question.
No, but does that make sense? Like it's a hard thing to really grapple with. Like, I'm happy I've never had to menstruate. I'm hoping I never have to menstruate. Seems like that's not a great time. I haven't met a girl yet that's like, it's great, I'm on my period. Like, why did you tell me that? I did not need that information. Well, I mean, it might be like high five, I'm not pregnant. Like that's a different reason to be enthusiastic for it. Okay. I mean, let's just, we can be honest about the reality of the way the human body works, but.
Like, so external stresses or internal stresses?
Yes.
which one are you talking about? Which, who, women or male feel more internal stresses or external stresses?
No. We just naturally have more stress applied to us as insert gender. We, due to how we're socialized, and some people get really fucking uppity about what gender people are, but, we are socialized in a certain way with certain expectations and certain stressors. I obviously fell prey to body dysmorphia of trying to put on as much muscle mass as necessary. Is it useful? Hell yes, because it's fun to lift heavy weights. But I've grown to love my captor, like all good Stockholm syndrome. Whereas, for females, I guess they need to be small, yet have a really big butt, yet have really toned arms, yet be really lean, yet have, so we say, a solid development of certain anatomical character. It's just like, there's, it seems from the outside looking in, there's a bit more pressure for females. Like, when's the last time any of you guys had to put on foundation, makeup, eyeliner, lipstick, or otherwise? And I'm not going to judge gentlemen if you do. I use the same bar soap on my hair as I do my face and everything else. Like, that's just growing up male. Never had to do that stuff. I used to do hair gel when I kind of cared when I was younger. That's it. Okay. What's that?
That's a head and shoulders. Like 5 and 1.
5 and 1, Irish
That's a red
Springs.
flag. That's a
I am
red
not
flag.
I'm not a rich kid. Okay. Anytime I go to a hotel, I still throw the mini bars in a bag. Okay. Take them every damn time. But so that's the thing, that when we talk about it happens more to women, is that due to being female, which there are some obvious differences in the human to male physiology, or is that a socialized difference? And so it's a really hard thing to parse, and I don't know. But instead, let's think deeply about it. One of the big issues in exercise physiology is the research on women's muscle tissue in older life compared to men's muscle tissue in older life. And I'm probably brought this up before, but I want to always bring this home because you need to think critically about research. When this was published, it was essentially done in the 90s. And these were 80-year-old individuals from Muncie, Indiana, the areas around. If you're 80 years old in Muncie, Indiana, when were you born? In the 1990s. If you were in this research in the 90s, you're 80 years old. When were you born?
1910.
Okay. Have you guys, any of you been to Muncie, Indiana? It's a great place to leave, isn't it? Yeah. So what we say is the major job opportunities of a male and female when growing up? So you'd have been, born in the 10s, teens, or whatever. You would have been an adult in the 20s and 30s, young adults, and then 30s, you're getting into the professional career. What options for employment did someone really have in not so fancy Muncie, Indiana at that point? For which gender? Okay, so what was the jobs women could do back then? This is Muncie, Indiana. You're being really, yeah.
Is it Ball State in Muncie?
Yeah. That's where they did the research. It was Ball State University. So, think about it, guys. Things that you guys are growing up in a fascinating time, because when I grew up, the only women in the weight room were like intense, psychotic people. They were so much fun to be around. Okay. Like it was essentially only dudes that also were doing it, and usually just for sports. Okay. And then you had obviously you've always had the bodybuilding, I want to look pretty. And then what you guys have grown up thanks to things as weird as it says is to say this out loud, but the CrossFit of normalizing women lifting weights. Okay. Those women born in the 19s, what's the heaviest weight they lifted? Okay, and they're not doing that thing for reps. Well, they're technically doing it for reps, but it's not part of a progressive training protocol. They're not playing sports. Their sport is maybe quilting, knitting and crocheting. So the problem is when we're looking at these 80-year-old muscle fibers, we got 80-year-old guys that they were farmers. They were blue-collar manual laborers. And these women, for the most part, were housewives. And that is not to denigrate the real work that is being the caretaker in a home. Absolutely not. But who do you think is going to have better muscle fiber at that age? Make sense? So when we look at this research and we're like, okay, why does this happen more in women than men? Does it involve estrogen? Does it involve actual physiological differences? Or is this like a sociological effect? Is there other things going on there? Does that make sense to you guys? Just think critically and then ask yourself like, okay, what's the real mechanism of these differences? Because I haven't seen much differences between the genders when it comes to the GI, but I also don't fully understand cramping, which once again, I'm really okay with not knowing about. But obviously that's something that a lot of women do. And maybe that is a factor, that's somehow working in on this. So went through a lot of different sections and how, if they're misfiring, what can occur. The reason we do this is if we know what happens when parts of the machine break, we've got a better idea of what each part of the machine is doing. Does that make sense to you guys? Now, we brought up a little bit earlier, which is, do you get dehydrated when you're drinking? This is osmolarity, okay? We are always going from the low pressure, the low concentration to the high concentration. That's going to pull fluid in that direction. So whenever we ingest a beverage, we typically want something that has a lower osmolarity than our own body, which is going to make it a lot easier to take into our body. Okay, so we can see, basic water doesn't really have much. Now, if you got distilled, it'll be even lower. Sweat, obviously, we're losing a certain amount of electrolytes, and that's really what we're trying to replace. So we're potentially going to go a little bit higher, but notice we're all going to be flirting around essentially the level that's not too much higher than the blood serum itself. Isostar and Lucozade, those are European style Gatorades. Okay, that's why you guys might not be very familiar looking at those names there. And what we're going to find is, go figure, our gastric emptying is going to be affected by that osmolarity. So when it's higher osmolarity, we're not going to empty as quickly. Plus you guys have all played sports. You kind of had that cotton mouth or otherwise, because you did a lot of, high osmolarity beverages really quickly. And yeah, guys, if you want to move back to wherever you started off to be near your stuff, feel free. So now let's talk about actually getting stuff in us. We made the reference before to the villi and the microvilli. So villi are the folds, microvilli are the miniature folds on each of those individual cells. And thanks to the total amount that we're going to have running through that small intestine, we're really looking at what's going to end up being close to the surface area, or greater than a literal tennis court. And that's for a normal sized human. We're not even talking about, Nordic strongman and otherwise. So we're going to now run through a little bit more of that true absorption of each of those macronutrients. And then, as well as, we're getting water through the effects of diffusion through osmolarity, as well as we're going to talk about minerals, which you guys brought up a little bit. We have transporters, and what's really tricky about some of these minerals is they compete. So we'll have one transporter that we're having more than one mineral going through. So if we take in certain minerals at the same time as others, we can actually have an issue where we're not able to digest the one as well. So that's where people can get themselves in trouble, where they megadose one mineral and they can sometimes exclude another. And now we can potentially be in a situation where we don't have enough. So how long does it take to pass through you? Well, eat some corn on the cob and let me know when you see the corn the second time. Okay. Most folks, it's somewhere in the neck of 12 hours to a couple days. Yes.
Oh, no, I was just saying like 2 days later.
Hey, no, that's cool. It's everybody's going to have their own speed. Okay. So what we're going to find is thanks to that smooth muscle, that's going to be contracting with both peristalsis, moving thing, as well as mixing. So it's going to alternate back and forth. See, I'm now doing the crab hands too, where that's going to cause food to mix through and get a little bit better of the absorption. Now, carbohydrates, we started in the mouth. We're going to take those starches and break them into simple individual carbohydrates, which is really going to end up being, for the most part, galactose, glucose, the major one, and fructose. Okay. Now, once we go ahead and get through the stomach, that's where we're going to see all of those pancreatic juices, which are going to help get everything broken down into typically disaccharides as well as individual carbohydrates in certain cases. And that's where those brush border enzymes are lactase, sucrase, maltase is going to do its job to get it down to the simple parts. Does lactate deficiency make sense to you guys? Now, Cam did a good job earlier bringing up fiber. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate, but because we don't have the ability to break it down, bacteria inside of our body is going to do that for us. And when it breaks it down, it's going to break it down into typically short chain fatty acids. Okay, so that cellulose is now going to also end up a little bit in the toilet as well. What gets fermented, aside from not just the hydrogen gas, carbon dioxide, a little bit of methane, a little bit of hydrogen sulfide, depending on what we're eating. These fatty acids, okay, are going to be taken in, and they actually do have a certain amount of positive effects on our overall health. Now, the indigestible, that is that seed coat for the corn, that's just going out the back, okay? Now, when I say we break down these carbohydrates, we start with these big strands here. We start with that branching, so you see literally alpha 4-1 bonds between. This is actually an alpha 1-6 bond is where we get branching. This is what happens when we have to take graduate level biochemistry over 2 years or 2 different semesters. We're going to eventually break it down into these simple individual carbohydrates. And we're going to have a transporter that's going to be glucose and galactose with a syn port, meaning it's using sodium to get it in the body. Okay. We also have a transporter that's only for fructose, and that's our GLUT5. Now, once we get inside the cell, we're going to then we're going to pump out some of that sodium, but we're also going to then get those carbohydrates into the capillaries, typically feeding into the bloodstream, really going to the liver for its first pass of effectively being metabolized a little bit, typically all into glucose. Now, think critically about the components I just brought up on the right side when it comes to getting glucose in the body, okay? Getting carbohydrates. Notice we have a transporter for it, and it competes with what other sugar? Yeah, no worries, guys. What's the other type of carbohydrate that glucose competes with for the transporter to get in the body? With galactose. So here's the thing, guys, let's think this through. That tells us straight up, we can only take in, first and foremost, we have a specific receptor for it, which means we need to get it to go through those receptors to get into the cells, which means we can only take in glucose to a certain speed. What carbohydrate doesn't compete with glucose? Which means we can take fructose in independently, and then we can saturate that out. That's why you see sucrose as a sweetener in a lot of sports beverages, and it's just not pure glucose. Because at a certain point, you can't actually absorb any more glucose per hour. So if we want to absorb any more carbohydrate, we got to take in fructose. It's really fascinating. There's also receptors for lactate. So lactate is also a sugar. 3-carbon sugar that some people think is a waste product. You can actually take that as an extra carbohydrate form to go as well. Now, we just talked about maximizing. What's the other mineral we need to absorb that glucose? Sodium. So what's that tell you? If we want to help somebody increase their absorption of glucose, what mineral do we maybe want to put in the beverage? Makes sense? Just put a little salt in it. So that's why when you guys look at Gatorade, otherwise, that's part of the reason we have electrolytes in there, because it's going to allow you to take that in a bit faster. Okay. Now, talk about protein digestion. Really, we're getting it started with pepsin inside of the stomach. And then we've got all of those pancreatic protein or proteases that are going to break things down further. Now, we're going to get that acidic environment thanks to the parietal cells, which that pH really helps break down proteins in the first place, as well as when you say denature and unravels, proteins are naturally clumped up. They're in their tight position. When we acidify them, they open up. And when they open up, that's when those scissors of the enzymes can really do their job. Okay, we're gonna get them into individual amino acids as well as di-SO2, and then tripeptides. We have 3 that are gonna go on through. So remember, think of these different enzymes as scissors. So that pepsin is going to take this and break it down into tripeptides. From there, remember, we have the important ones because we have different sequences of amino acids that are going to require different enzymes to do their job. So we're going to go ahead, break those down further inside of those cells into their basic amino acids, and that's what's going to go in the bloodstream. Notice again, guys, when we're looking up here, what's this mineral we need to help us get amino acids into our cells? Now you see how much more important sodium is, not just for electrical chemical gradients, but it's also really important for digestion. Okay, now that doesn't mean we need to salt everything with reckless abandon, but it is an important thing to understand. If you've got an exercising athlete that's sweating a lot and we're not replacing it, that's not just diminishing their ability to perform, it's actually diminishing their ability to digest their food and be able to do so at a decent clip. Questions? Yes.
Is that why people take shots of pickle juice for like quick hydration? There's a lot of sodium.
It's not so much hydration, but electrolyte replenishment. So when you're a hard exercising, well, Gracie's not here, so I'm gonna throw her under. I gave that example. It was actually when the pandemic happened. She was in one of my classes and she kind of just started the training montage. She was back home in Georgia and just wanted to just work out because what the hell else are you gonna do when the pandemic started? You know, it's either that or you're gonna, I don't know, just stream Netflix until you're bored to your board or anything else. Now, she was doing like two or 3 day training because that was what she wanted to do. Living in I think she's from southern Georgia, like relatively close to Florida, which might explain her a little bit more if you think about that. And so she was like, I'm having issues sleeping. I'm not really cramping, but I just don't feel good. And I'm really tired. I'm like, what's your diet? And that's when she went on, I've gone on a clean diet. And so it was clean in like the Shape magazine, like nonsense. It's like, you're a hard training athlete that sweats a lot, which is normal. And so the problem is she was hydrating appropriately, but she wasn't eating enough electrolytes. Like, just add some salt to your food. Go figure, all of a sudden she could sleep better and she was a lot more relaxed throughout the rest of the day because she wasn't dehydrated. Instead, she was slightly hyponatremic, which the group in the back did a good job of bringing up where that hyponatremia is potentially lethal. Might be if you weren't going that far, but like anything else, when you're working with athletes, and I'm sorry, I like the car analogy. Do I need to worry about, getting a tune on my sensible family sedan, aka 2005 Honda Accord? Then you go get that engine tune, go bolt on a turbo, improve the like. Just I can putt my way back and forth here. I'm not trying to break the limits, but if you got a race car, you got to keep that thing tuned up. You got to make sure you put in really good fuel, and you got to make sure that you keep everything at essentially optimized as you can. So by no means is, make sure you tell her to her face. By no means is Gracie a race car. Okay, she's at best a decent pickup truck from the early 2010s.
But aren't you recording this to watch it?
What's that?
Aren't you recording?
Absolutely.
She will watch
Yeah.
it.
What do you mean? There'd be comments about Joe Rogan and everything else. This thing's being inflamed somehow. Okay. But more importantly, the reality, guys, once again, when we're working with folks, we're just trying to meet demands. That's really what we're trying to do. And some folks are going to naturally have higher demands just due to how they live, and that's fine. So fats, we're really talking about fat, like you guys have probably seen before, whenever you have using like vinegar and olive oil dressing, what happens to it if you just let it sit for a while? Bingo. So you're going to have that oil sitting by itself and it gloms together. So what we naturally need to do is through these enzymes, break them into individual fatty acids, and then through the use of our bile, we're going to be able to get it into much smaller packets. So think about doing the dishes. If you guys have a lot of oil in the water and you put soap in there, notice how the fat little droplets get really small. That's emulsification. That's what soap is doing. Now you're not soaping your GI. That's another great way to get diarrhea. But instead, you're using this bile to naturally make these into smaller packets. and it's a lot easier to break it down. So we've got that droplet. We're then going to go ahead and emulsify this into those smaller individual droplets. And so finally, we have what's known as a micelle. Okay, essentially the fatty acids where we have the acid part facing out and the hydrophobic region facing in. Okay. So we're going to be absorbing this through either active transport or simple diffusion. A lot of it, guys, notice it involves sodium, on occasion involves energy as well. Requires energy to make all these enzymes for digestion as well. Now, this in turn is going to, ooh, that sounded dangerous, like a cell phone ringer for a second there. We're going to go from high to low when we can. That's usually really more with water than anything else. And that in turn isn't going to require the ATP that we're going to be using in other positions, like we're talking about with some proteins. Notice we use the sodium, but we have that sym port that's going to, or sorry, after that sym port, we're going to have that antiport, which is going to help pump the sodium back into essentially the chyme, so it can be used to help pull in another amino acid, carbohydrate. Make sense, guys? So we showed you guys the visual, but let's talk it through. We have receptors that allow these carbohydrates to get inside the body. We have to use sodium to get it in, and then we have this ATP requiring pump to turn over sodium and potassium to allow for digestion, or allow for that sodium to go back out to be used. Now, once we go ahead and get inside the cell, we're just using the GLUT2. Now, literally, they really broke the mold there. GLUT2 stands for glucose transporter number 2. Okay, any of you guys know of any other glucose transporter numbers? Because we sure have brought up one of these in class before. Say again? Yeah, because there's one for fructose. Good job. But I'm looking for another one that's a little bit more important when it comes to muscle. GLUT4 receptors. That's the same family. The key is what cells are this specific to. And you're absolutely right, Jalen. GLUT5 is important for fructose, which is kind of funny because it should be actually fructose. Or it should be like fruit. Yeah, she wouldn't put the I in there. Boy, I'm getting all types of fun stuff for people to see on there. I hope Corey's having a good time. Okay, so fat. We get all the way down to those little micelles. We get it into through literal diffusion. Okay, so it's gonna, because we've got a phospholipid bilayer, it's just gonna come through the fatty layer, okay? From there, we're going to actually bring them back into triglycerides, and then that's gonna combine with cholesterol and phospholipids into what's known as chylomicrons. Bigger packets that are then going to go into the bloodstream and go around. Okay. Now, fascinating here. We have these micelles that come in. Also, medium chain fatty acids are actually interesting. They can diffuse through membranes without having to form into those packets. Apolipoproteins, phospholipids, gonna make us these chylomicrons and send on out. Lipoproteins. What do I know that term from? Does that sound familiar to any of you guys? Maybe a high density version of it, a low density lipoprotein. So guys, this is literally kind of how we put together those packets of cholesterol that go through your bloodstream. Okay. Now, proteins, remember, we're going to break it all the way down. These individual amino acids are from the di, tri, and individuals. From there, notice it goes to the liver. That's actually the first stop. Once we get through the liver, then in turn, we're going to go ahead and put it in. Notice we have a huge number of different transporters for amino acids because we've got so many different types. Macronutrient digestion makes sense to you guys. Questions, comments, concerns? So let's go ahead. Let's start with vitamins. Okay. So good job bringing up the importance of different locations of where we are going to be absorbing each of these different vitamins. Now, we're going to talk about how they work later. What?
I was gonna ask, isn't biotin to help grow hair and fingernails?
Yeah, so it's effectively collagen production. It's gonna be part of it. Pantothenic acid a little bit, but vitamin C is even more important for collagen. But yeah, don't worry. It's going to be its own night. We just talk about vitamins and minerals. And I mean, I have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun with all this. Maybe that's the problem. Okay. But now does this resection stuff make a bit more sense of how it can be really problematic? We really do have different components of how it goes. Now, what's really fascinating, guys, is notice what's interesting about niacin. Yeah, notice it's one of the few ones we're going to get in there. What do you guys see in a lot of your pre-workout supplements? Shit ton of it, which causes flushing, just like beta alanine, which causes paresthesia. So most people would think I've been poisoned, but instead folks thinking like, yes, I've got the good meth. Let's fucking send it. Okay. And it's like, Jesus Christ, guys, what happened just lifting weights? Why do we got to do drugs to lift weights? You would lift weights and then go do drugs, but I'm old. Okay. But notice, guys, also what we're going to find is we do have a certain amount of enzymes that are required, but the really fascinating one is B12. Because notice there's an intrinsic factor, aka this needs to bind to that intrinsic factor so it can be taken up in the ileum, and that's literally released in the stomach. And that's one of the reasons why some folks can have issues with B12 levels as they get older, because their bodies naturally doesn't produce as much of that intrinsic factor. Questions? Yeah.
Is B12 the one like for energy? Like, what's that one?
All of your B vitamins are important in one step or another of some energy system in the body. So every single B vitamin is incorporated somewhat. They're also a little bit important for DNA repair, especially folate. And that's why if you guys ever choose to have kids, make sure you are supplementing with folate beforehand, ladies, because a lack of folate can cause neural tube defects, that's spinal bifida, if you're lucky. Otherwise, it can be a child loss for obvious reasons, because pregnancy is, okay, so nutrition with athletes is really fascinating, okay, because there's some extra demands we're going to have. Pregnancy nutrition, if you're really going to get into it, is fucking insane, because that little bastard is pumping out so much glucagon that some women will develop. How many of you guys have heard the term gestational diabetes? What is gestational diabetes? What is it? No, she didn't have a problem producing insulin before she got pregnant.
She's too much of a problem.
That little bastard is trying to leech so much off of her. Might not be a bastard. Hopefully she knows who the father is. But it is going to cause literally so much insulin production for some women that their pancreas can't keep it up. They didn't have diabetes. Little Johnny, Sally, whatever the hell name you decide to name that parasite, is leaching so much and wants so many calories from mom. It is overrunning mom's natural ability to produce those actual hormones to keep her blood sugar from not going through the roof. So yeah, they've already started to take years off her life and she's not even had it yet. Isn't that insane? The other fun fact is nursing is actually the highest caloric demands for a woman. Gestation is only about 350 calories a day. Nursing easily can top 500. Yes.
So with like the whole insulin for pregnant women, is that why a lot of them have to take the glucose test?
Oral glucose tolerance tests, yes. So we can kind of see how they're going to respond and make sure the blood sugar is not running too high. One of the big issues with gestational diabetes, aside from, I mean, I do make jokes about it, but it can obviously be relatively life-threatening, because the other problem is it makes the baby grow to be way larger than they should. And it's got to pass through a very finite size location, which, don't get me wrong, you have cesarean sections and otherwise, but that still can be very traumatic for any woman to go through. And it still can cause other metabolic issues, because you have diabetes, and that can cause heart problems, that can cause cardiovascular problems. Well, another way of saying other beyond just the heart problems. So that's one of the things to stay on top of. Most women, yes. Most women that have gestational diabetes afterwards will go back normal because they don't have that parasite pumping out all those hormones working against them. Okay. So yeah, they're a prisoner inside of your body and they're already revolting. Parenthood sounds awesome, doesn't it? Well, I told you before, it's really awesome being male. Everyone should try it. Okay? Sorry, ladies. Now, here's the big thing. We have a whole lot of bacteria in our body. Now, your stomach, because it's so acidic, is relatively low. So notice the 0 to 10 to the third power. 10 to the third power is what? And notice, guys, our units over here this is per gram, okay, inside of our GI. So what's 10 to the second power? Good, so 10 to the third? Good. So notice you're gonna have 0 to 1,000 individual bacteria per gram of like sample wall in your stomach. Small intestine, notice it goes to the fourth power. So 0 to 10,000. Your jejunum, we go to the ileum, we're getting near the end line, 10 to the 5th, 10 to the 8th. Well, 10 to the 5th is all the way up to just under 8 billion, so 100 million. 10 to the 10th and 10 to the 12th, now we're gonna like Jeff Bezos' net worth. We're talking billions of bacteria per gram. Like there's a lot, and that's why if someone, you would never drink water out of a toilet, hopefully. And especially after anyone has used the bathroom in there. And the reason for it, why do we, actually, this is another good thing. Why do humans have disgust? Why is disgust a universal thing across cultures throughout the world?
Learned behavior,
What's that?
learned behavior.
It's a protective measure. And it's not necessarily learned. Like that, why are there people that are afraid of spiders, afraid of snakes, and afraid of like big cats? Bingo, because that shit used to murder humans all the time. Well, apes, evolution happened, sorry guys. But getting back to it, what you're gonna find is that disgust is there's a good reason. Oh, you guys want a fun little sporting analogy of like, if you ever wanna like really get in somebody's face? So it was, I think it was actually, it wasn't Rick Majerus, but it was another basketball coach. This is back in the 1990s, where he had all of his athletes come in, okay? He's like, you know, they had lost a number of games in a row, so like we needed to right the ship. So he walks up and he's standing in front of kind of a big table like this. He's like, you know, we've had a hard run, and you know, I want to give you guys an analogy. So he picks up and puts a bucket of ice cream on there, like, you know, giant, like 1 gallon thing of, or 1 or 2 gallon things of ice cream. There's like, this is ice cream. Like everyone likes ice cream, right? Like, yeah, of course. Everyone wants some ice cream. Like, yeah, absolutely. So the guy puts some bowls up there and has it there. He's like, that's what we want to be. We want to be ice cream. Everybody wants ice cream. Like, okay. So then pulls up the same size gallon thing, and it's transparent. So you can see, and it's just shit. It's literally just shit. And he's like, this is shit. No one wants shit. No one wants to be around shit. No one wants to touch shit. No one wants to eat shit. No one wants to be around it, right? Right? Everybody likes ice cream, right? Nobody likes shit. Okay. But everyone wants ice cream. Yeah. So all right. Takes an ice cream scoop, takes a scoop of the shit, throws it right on top of the ice cream. All right, guys, eat up. And they did exactly like you, like, no, I don't want to eat that. Like, why don't you guys want to eat that? It's just like 1 scoop of shit in the top. There's plenty of ice cream. You just eat around it. I'm like, no. So you're telling me it just takes 1 scoop of shit and nobody wants to eat the ice cream anymore? Like nobody wants the ice cream. Nobody wants it. No, yeah, no, we're good, coach. It's okay. We'll work on it. And then literally turns to one of the players and goes, and you're the shit in my ice cream. But think about it. That disgust is a good reason it's there, because we as humans know excrement is an issue. Meanwhile, my freaking dog, I got to watch him when we go for walks, because he'll either roll in it or he'll try to eat it, because he doesn't have that, because they'll take nutrition from it. There's some animals that do that naturally. They eat their own feces because that's how they get energy. Rabbits' digestive tracts are really inefficient. So they actually sometimes have to eat their own waste to get all the calories out of the food. Yeah, that's why I'm so happy to not be a rabbit for a number of reasons. But when we're looking with humans, that amount of bacteria is also doing good jobs in us. That's fermenting our foods, and that's making sure that we're getting those short chain fatty acids. We're getting some positive effects. Actually, vitamin K production as well can come from that. But it's important to understand, like, yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on there. Questions? So, how do we affect our gastric emptying? Literally, thinking about smelling or seeing food. How many of you guys got that Pavlov's dog? This was in the before the sickness came. How many of you guys been to a Cinnabon in your life? One of those stores? Everybody knows what that is, right? How far away from a cinnamon can you smell the cinnamon? Yeah, I mean, like they literally purposely avoid food courts, so you smell them by themselves. You just smell like the Sbarro and like the Panda Express and like the thing that I guess every mall has. But it's like, oh damn, like, I guess I do want a cinnamon roll right now. So you get that salivary tour, like literally your gut, when you smell that, especially when you see that, that's gonna kick up your own actual digestive rate. How much we're taking in, if we got a huge amount in there, we try to clear it through. Have a great night, Jake. Hope it's a good night, but a quiet night, if you know what I mean. Okay? If we're having something that's really dense, so I'm sure all of you guys have had like a really fatty meal and you've been good for a really long period of time. Whereas you maybe had a meal that was pretty light, like something that was rapidly digesting like rice or otherwise low fiber, low fat. It was like, it feels like you'd eat again in 10 minutes. Okay? Temperature is actually going to affect it. So this is really hot or really cold. Okay? In fact, this is also not even adding in if you're having food that's not just really hot, but also really spicy. Osmolarity. So remember, the more hyper concentrated, the slower we're going to go. The temperature, which is, it turns out if we're overheating, if we're dehydrated, we're not going to be able to digest food as quickly. And aside from the whole heat, illness, injury issue we could have an athlete, now we can't even recover from that meal as fast as we want after that exercise. Another reason to make sure we don't push people too far. Once we go up too high, we've got less blood flow to the GI, so we're just not going to digest. Think that's that stomach cramp we talked about earlier. Go figure, you do see a little bit difference in gastric emptying in women and men. Now, also, what do you see typically different between women and men? Aside from facial hair? Except for my sister. I'm also recording that. I love her, she's great. We are very hairy humans. But what's the key difference between your average female and your average male? Can you guys have the chance to meet my sister? She's the mean one. No one believes that. She's like this tall. She's like 5'3" on a really good day, but she will fight people and scare the shit out of them on the regular. Now, I'm half a foot taller than my sister. So what do you think that means for my GI?
Longer passage, I guess.
It's probably bigger. So it can just handle more volume. Makes sense? So the gastric emptying could also be another component, relative size. Make sense? I'm sure those of you guys that are in a relationship with someone who's bigger than you, do the bigger person typically eat more than you do? I know. Okay. And then notice, guys, the stress. How many guys have got that friend that when they go through a breakup, they're they're losing 5 pounds minimum because they can't eat for however long afterwards that comes with it. That's not a feature, just so we're clear. But that is one of those things that folks can have happen to them. How many of you guys are going through stress? And you're like, why do I feel lightheaded? And you're like, oh, I haven't eaten today.
I know some people stress eat, and then some people not like stress starve.
Welcome to the wonders of how human reactions to situations are going to be highly variable. How many of you guys know people that are stress eaters? You know, as soon as they get under any stressful situation, just keep the chips away from them because they're going to go through it. They can't do a peanut butter serving, but they can do a peanut butter jar. Okay, that's not a personal indictment. That's a tactic. Because here's the thing: if you have an athlete that when they're stressed and they overeat, and they're in season and they are stressed and they can't gain weight because they're already at the weight you want them to be, especially if they're a weight class athlete, you got to be on top of that. Make sense? Now, this is more psychology, but it's still understanding their individual physiology and how they respond. And the antithesis: if you got a teammate. And I'm just picking on Gabby because she's easy to pick on. But if you got a teammate that goes through a breakup, and yeah, it's probably baseball's probably the other side. They probably go in a breakup and they go on 12-ounce curl benders. So they probably have more than enough calories. But if you got a teammate that she's not eating because she's upset about her relationships, and this not so breakup, could be family drama, anything else, and they're not eating and they're in season, how's their playing going to go? Have you actually had that? You observed that in the time that you've, yeah. I mean, it's college. So, shit's going to happen to people all the time. Life, unfortunately, is a full contact sport. Now, what we're going to find is GI problems are pretty common in athletes. Okay. So now we get to pick on Evan. How many, we don't necessarily need to throw you under the bus, but how many of your teammates are absolutely going to agree with this? How does it normally present for you guys?
the nerves before like a race or something. It's not the fire float.
Mhm. Yeah, but part of it is
Yeah,
just,
like a long run, because it's a lot of like bouncing.
okay, so notice, guys, we've got three different causes. First is the physiological. She talked about the anxiety, the other thing is blood flow, we got less going in the area. Okay? Second is mechanical. That is literally the bouncing up and down you're doing when you're running. Cramped posture. What sport can you think of when you're in a cramped posture for a long period of time? Aerobic. Aerobic sport.
Skiing.
You could be bent over a little bit. That's not skiing doesn't require effort. Cycling, speed skating makes sense where you're in that hunched over position and your thighs are coming up and hitting yourself in the stomach for probably God knows how long you're on them. Make sense? And then the nutritional component, I'm sure you've learned your body. What's your pre-race meal for like 5K, 10K outdoors? Yeah, you're not doing steak and eggs for some reason? Okay, yes, Kevin.
So one of my friends who has GI problems, especially like prior to the conditioning and stuff like that, she is vegetarian. Does that make like a major impact at all?
Well, it's just the food choices. Now, I would say like most athletes are going to be able to deal with simple carbohydrates, which typically are vegetarian. I've yet to find a high carb version of beef. If that exists, I'm very intrigued. I guess it's beef with barbecue sauce, maybe. And from there, it's the fiber component. So you want to do plain oatmeal. You don't want to do high fiber oatmeal. If anything, you want to do more like instant oatmeal where you know you've got more sugar and probably less fiber. And so that's going to be typically a little bit more tolerated. Guys, GIs are funny. How many of you guys know that there's certain foods that you cannot eat before you go work out or you're going to have a bad freaking day? And sometimes it's just volume. You're like, I know I can't eat more than one serving of oatmeal. If I did 2 servings, I'm going to be cramping up. I'm going to feel like garbage. So part of this is practice, because do you really need to worry about a pre-workout meal for, your weekend warrior that just wants to get in shape and do a little bit better with whatever they're doing? No. Do you need to worry about it for collegiate athletes? Yeah, especially depending on the sport. Do we really need to worry about the pre-workout meal for track and field sprint? Yeah, I mean, if they do something really stupid, like let's just pound out a bunch of hot wings and try to sprint, like, yeah, that's how you become an MC disaster pants pretty fast around the turn. Okay? But it's usually self-control. But if you got to go out and do a max effort 30-minute run or 90 minutes of soccer, or you have to pitch an entire baseball game, you better think about what you're putting in your body. And the key thing is here, like we just talked about, you know what you can do. Gabby, what's the go-to pre-game meal? Line of cocaine and a Diet Coke?
Yes. Usually something lighter, but I more so like I'll eat a decent breakfast or whatever, like overnight oats or something like that. But depending on game time, the bigger thing for me is like applesauce or something right before that's like quick.
Yeah, simple carbohydrate, really no fiber, no fat, no real protein, real easy to get in. Nico, what's your go-to? So same thing, simple meal. We're not trying to throw a bunch of oil on it. We're not trying to throw, and like that literally feeds into this next component right here. We're just trying to make sure we're making good choices with our athletes. So if we have any issues with lactose intolerance, we ain't playing with it whatsoever. Probably not trying to go too high of fiber. And notice, guys, that's 1 to 3 days before competition. Okay. You already shared your basic timeline. I'll tell you what, for me, the slip and slide takes about 18 to 24 hours. I'm sure some of you guys have about the same idea with yourself of how quickly you clear certain foods. That's your own GI, that's its own motility time. You know when you need to start getting things together. Okay. I've already made enough bad stories, so we're not going to go any further into them this evening. NSAIDs, aspirin, so like ibuprofen, otherwise that can sometimes mess up GIs. I'm sure, how many of you guys have had to take antibiotics and that really made things weird for a little bit? That's not something you're going to be doing naturally, but you need to be careful. Some folks can have issues with fructose. It's the same thing. We want to make sure that we want to know what we're doing. It's not time to eat interesting meals. So right now the Olympics are going on. If you are my athlete that I've been coaching for however long we're at the Olympics, aside from the fact that I'm just gonna be like walking around like this all the time because I got somebody to the Olympics. I'm gonna be like, your ass is eating the same boring shit. We're gonna put that damn oatmeal in my carry-on and I'm gonna be carrying it like I'm carrying the damn football for the president. Like, we just want to make sure that we've had the foods that you're used to. After you get done, yeah, we'll go out and have fun and, see what Chinese propaganda looks like. And we'll see how bad my Chinese is. But for the beginning, don't eat anything new. Nico, how many times you see some guy, you guys travel somewhere for a baseball game and they try to eat the local fare and they are not faring well afterwards. Okay, you don't want to be the brown streak sliding into the base. Okay, now here's the other one. This is something, do we need to really worry about our carbohydrate intake during exercise? Bingo. So Homer Simpson just wants to get in shape, just drink water. You doing soccer 2-a-days, tournaments or otherwise, definitely gonna care about it. Abby, if she was training for definitely like a marathon, we need to figure out what's the carbohydrate strategy. How many GU packets can she do? How long do we have to space them out? How much water can she tolerate? So we know she's going to be well fueled and not too dehydrated when she finishes. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so I got back to you guys on your review articles. I had myself another note, but we're going to do one last little thing before you guys go ahead and get going. So we've talked a bit about essentially the caloric needs that folks are going to have depending on their goals. I'm just putting this back up so then I have to see the doom guy in the background. But how many of you guys have heard of an approach to diet known as if it fits your macros? It's an approach to dieting, which is referred to as if it fits your macros. Okay, how you guys heard of that? It was a bigger movement in the mid-thousands and the early teens. Nobody's heard of that? Okay, Juliana, what is it?
It's basically like whatever they want, I think, right? As long as it fits within.
The macros.
Yeah, the macros.
Yeah, it's I utilize the term douchebag nutrition. Okay, so let's say you need 400 grams of carbohydrate for all the exercise you're doing today. Now, we could just brutalize you with broccoli and make you eat like 4 pounds of it and then all the fiber and a lot of other issues. Okay, or we could say, she's gonna do 400 grams through potatoes, rice, bread, pasta. Sounds a little bit more appetizing, a little bit more realistic, and still some veggies in there and fruit. Or we can just go straight up debag nutrition and you're just doing 400 grams of pure pixie sticks. Just pounding that down. Sounds really healthy and safe, doesn't it? So it's not exactly the best situation, but one thing that I want to introduce to you guys is the idea of discretionary calories. So let's say we're gonna do a little math problem with yourself, okay? Write down somewhere, just what is your body weight, okay? Whatever your body weight is, ballpark it, we don't have to have an exact number, okay? And we're gonna say, if for your maintenance calories, you have the really good setup of, not necessarily you're doing chicken, rice, and broccoli, but you're doing good whole food meals. But at the end of the day, people sometimes like to do kind of a fun snack, reward, etc. Okay. So whatever your body weight is, that's the amount of calories you can do whatever the hell you want with. Okay. So, and then that's for you just trying to maintain your body weight. If you're trying to lose weight, I'm sorry, the fun is over. You typically need to remove that stuff. But we're going to say that you're trying to go bulk and you are going dirty bulking. So take your body weight and multiply it by 3. Okay, that's going to be your really fun discretionary calories. So at the end of the day, what are you going to give yourself as could be your post-workout reward, or it could be just kind of the dessert you want to do with dinner, or something else you want to throw in the day. Does that make sense to you guys? So it's something to help folks get through a diet, because if you're trying to gain weight, I still can't believe you did that. Because it's just at a certain point, it's just brutal to go through that. You need to eat food that's hyper palatable. If you're really trying to gain weight, like it has to taste good. If you got to put down 6,000 calories of plain chicken and rice, whoa, like that's not sustainable. But if you're trying to lose weight, that's when you eat the boring plain oatmeal. If I gave you guys 5,000 calories of plain oatmeal a day, I don't think we have to worry about you guys overeating. But if I gave you 5,000 calories of every different type of cookie, ice cream, and snack cake, I think that can be doable. You're probably not, maybe not a good health decision, but I can make this happen, okay? So go through, figure out what you guys would use with that discretionary calorie, and we're gonna kind of talk our way through what that serving really gets to be. Notice, obviously, serving size will vary. Good. Go for it. Okay, so we do two different options. So you've got just your body weight in calories for what would be essentially your maintenance, dessert. Mind you, if it's only 100 calories, like, wow, you get a sad 100 calorie pack of Oreo thingies or whatever. But, the 3X one, like, okay, 300 calories. What would I want to do for a little bit of fun? That could be, X serving of ice cream, X serving of cookies, X serving of beef jerky, whatever you're into. But just kind of like, what does it really look like? Make sense?
And this most was like 3? Where's that the other one?
Two different ones. So you've got one that's just your body weight, and then your body weight times 3. So there should be 2 different types of snack. You could say, I want to do 1 Oreo, but when I get to do the 3X, I'm doing 3 Oreos. I respect that decision. Okay? Makes sense, guys? So what do you do?
I don't really have a sweet tooth, but.
Figure out how many calories per certain round. If there's something you did want to overeat on, just put that in. It doesn't have to be sweet, that just kind of where most people go. Okay, so here's the thing, each piece, it's 4 pieces of 90 calories, so you just do 90 divided by 4. So you end up with what? What's it? And so, whatever that is, yeah, so 125, so you can do closer to this. Just 28 side. Man, somebody really wants to do the big up. Hey, that's so better than nothing. And then you can actually do the high one, which is where you put all the pounds.
And then my sister was telling me like, oh, like, take this in the office.
So it's perfect. Here's some cereal. Full slice of
Yeah,
this.
she gets different every time. She's like,
That is one thing.
I'll get a little Caesar's pizza after this. What's that? Told him I'd get a little Caesar's pizza after this, make the whole thing.
That's, right there.
There. Hot and ready, man. That's, they're just giving you those 2 things. That's about it.
I got
$5.
with my big son.
There you go. And but see, that's the thing, like, you know what, if some folks, we've talked about different approaches to diet. Some folks are they have to stay on the rails. If they do a cheap food, like getting back to the peanut butter, there's always at least one person in this class that they can't do 1 tablespoon of peanut butter. Like, I know people that just mill through jars, and that's fine. But if you know that's who you are, like, you can't reward yourself with peanut butter because you're gonna treat it like a Pringles can and not stop once you start. But what's that?
That's me with chips.
That's fine. So then it's like, I'm not rewarding myself with chips if I'm in a weight loss phase or a maintenance phase. Instead, it's like, you know what? I can do, actually we had a good brief conversation with Nate, where he's like, I'm not a big sweets guy, but if I do, I go with like a brownie. So he's not gonna overeat on the brownies. Maybe if they're magical for other reasons. But we're going to go ahead instead, he's gonna do his 1 brownie. And it's like, okay, I got to have something that was sweet, that was a little bit more exciting than my, relatively structured diet. And, I can go to bed. I know folks that like, they do like 2 Hershey Kisses. That's their thing they do before they go to bed, or like the mini Snickers bar. Like, it's okay. The key is, treat yourself like a dog, reward yourself with food. I want to afford it all. Cool. No, hey, your choice is your choice. There's nothing wrong with that. But it gives you an idea of like, okay, what's it really mean? If I only have like 100 and, not many calories at the end of the day, does that really equate to much? Now, Landon over there is going to get to have fun because he's markedly larger than all of them. But, that's one thing. If your extra thing at the end of the day is 800 calories, like, okay, we're doing some work here, and that's okay. All right. Everybody come up with their basic thing? Okay, so obviously the serving size is going to be very different. We're going to go ahead, start off at the front, and we'll kind of work our way back, kind of going in a kind of seesaw or the Z as we go. So, give us the basic of what would be the serving size for your maintenance, fun meal, and then what would be your actual, like, you're trying to gain weight, having fun as well. You don't have to say the calorie amount, but just guys think serving size as we talk our way through.
I think it was like 3 Chips Ahoy cookies.
That was your living big, was 3 Chips Ahoy cookies?
Mhm.
All right, so the low one was just 1?
Yeah.
And that's cool. Landon, what do you come up with?
For maintenance, it'd be like a Cliff Bar, and then, for gaining, it'd be like a double cheeseburger.
See, doesn't necessarily need to be, you're going with the dessert. Some folks, could be fries, could be a burger. What do you come up with, Jalen?
First one is Doritos, like the little mini bag.
Yeah, that's, obviously less fun. And then the next one?
Oreos with milk.
Ooh, how many Oreos? There you go. I'm sorry, when people say Oreos, I'm like, this is 2. That's a sad number. That's another dirty bold thing to do. Here's the pro tip, guys. If you're trying to do an entire thing of Oreos, I've never done this in my life. You rip open the top, but you keep them all in the thing because that is actually going to be waterproof. So you pour the milk on top. So they're already naturally in the milk, and then you spin them so you get both sides as you're plowing through them. You need to eat faster. I told you I've only done that once. I've done a couple eating competitions, and there's a reason why I go to those more. What do you go with?
So for my maintenance, I said just 1 gram, and then to gain weight, I probably said sushi,
Okay, do you have an idea of like how many rolls that really accounts for?
20 pieces.
I bet it's more like a vegetarian roll option or otherwise.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Okay. I mean, sushi obviously is pretty variable. You get the ones that have got avocado and sandwich with fattier fish. That's 20 pieces for 400 something calories. That seems, hey, either way, good choice. Next up.
So for maintenance, I said a slice of cookie cake, and then to put on weight, I said fries and sweet tea.
Okay, is that like a medium, large? That's not a bad life.
So for maintenance, it would be like a small French fry, like McDonald's or something. And then for the other one, it'd be the cookie cake.
I like it. Next up.
My maintenance would be like Pillsbury cinnamon roll, and then for like dirty bulking, it'd be like Chick-fil-A fries.
Nice. Next up.
Mine was just 2 Oreos for maintenance. And then for gaining, the 2 Oreos and an ice white mocha.
Nice. Good. Next up.
Said 2 Oreos.
Guys, okay, I'm sorry for injecting my own opinions into